Ionian, Dorian, Mixolydian, Phrygian, Aeolian, Locrian, Superlocrian, diminished scale, half whole, whole half, diminished whole tone scale, Lydian chromatic scale, harmonic minor, melodic minor, scales. As a jazz improviser, your whole world is filled with scales, whole tone scale. And the thing is, if you're in school now learning jazz improvisation, or if you're a teacher learning jazz improvisation, or in fact, if you're an improviser yourself and you can think back to when you start learning, for sure, you were always told about the importance of these scales. Especially the first scales, where our major scale has turned into Ionian mode, and in other words, more, Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, all these modes or scales named after certain islands around Greece for some reason. And then later, even if you got more heavily into like the music theory and you learned about the two different types of diminished scales, and maybe at some point you just decided to start learning the Lydian chromatic concept, and you were told about the Lydian chromatic scale, and then you started looking at a lot of these scales. And a lot of these scales you knew already, but now all of a sudden they have different names. It could all be confusing. It could all be a real trial to learn. And even if you decide to go look into books for jazz improvisation, the first 10 pages, you were just thrown tons of music theory and scales. And then after that, you were told, okay, now let's play a blues, let's improvise. And then, of course, you're stuck there like, huh? The fact is, scales do help, but they are not the answer to learning how to improvise. If they were the answer to learn how to improvise, that would mean, hey, just because you know the alphabet, you should be able to write a book. You know that it doesn't work like that. Before you could actually write a book, you have to be able to learn how to write. What I mean, right, not just physically writing, but just the act of composition in writing, and also developing a certain writing style and learning different types of writing styles before you get to the point of being able to write a fiction novel or nonfiction. Even for writing nonfiction, there's ways you have to do that, writing an outline and this, that, and the other. And in other words, just because you know the alphabet doesn't mean you can write a book. So just because you know scales doesn't mean that you can improvise. How can you be improvise? Well, I'd say after my 30 plus years experience of teaching, and I noticed with a lot of the way that's worked for a lot of my beginning improvisers is that I don't start with scales at all. In fact, it's a long time before we even talk about scales. I like to think of improvising as a type of spontaneous composition. What I mean with that is, how does a composer compose? He or she starts out with a melodic idea. Now you can call it a motif, you can call it a melodic cell, you can call it what you want. The name of it just doesn't matter. As long as you understand what you mean, and of course that your student understands what you mean as well. I start off with just really simple melodic ideas that are no larger than a perfect fifth at first. And in fact, I don't even get into using arpeggios yet. I do use scale tones, chord tones at first. Of course, usually the triad, whether it's a major triad and a minor triad, whatever. But really, the main thing is, the purpose of all this is get the student to understand how melodies work, how to form a melody, how to manipulate a melody tonally and rhythmically. From then on, you could develop this until it becomes a scale. And then you will also notice that even after, so okay, then why don't I just jump to the scales? No, because a scale in and of itself is not a melody. Scales have been used to create melodies, but scales in and of themselves are not melodies. We want to be able to play melodies when we're improvising. When it comes down to telling a story with your improvisations, you have to start out really with something accessible to the listener. Not only to listen to the audience, but the listeners on the bandstand where you're playing. The musicians who you're playing with, they got to understand what you're doing as well. With that thought in mind, once you understand how melodies work, then actually it becomes easier to learn how to use the scales. It becomes easier to know how to manipulate the scales. Because even once you have the scales, there's no law that's written that says you have to use only those tones that are presented to you in a certain scale in order to play over a certain chord. In fact, if you're an improviser and if you've done transcriptions, you know that you don't find any of these pure scales in anybody's improvisation. In my experience, I've only found once in a Michael Brecker solo over a blues where he actually played a C-sharp Mixolydian scale up and down. But that was the only time it happened in his whole solo, over 2 bars. The rest of the solo was chromatic melodies. Again, my message here, my little rant, if I have to say, is scales are not the answer. Start off using melodies. And then even if you use patterns, say patterns, jazz patterns are good. Any type of patterns, they're great for improving your technique. They're great for improving your ears. But again, they're only helpful if you understand how to use them. They're only helpful if you just really listen to them and just don't try to just acquire them as quickly as possible. We spend so much time on input, but not enough on output. For every piece of input that you do, new melodic ideas, new scales, whatever, if it comes to that point, learn how to use them and try to learn how to use them immediately to get to understand them, because only then is the information useful to you if you know how to use it. So if you're new to my channel, please click the like button, subscribe. So please share this video with your friends, with your students, with anybody you feel that would benefit from this information. And please check out my other videos on improvisation, on tips, and on technique. And please comment. So this is Evan Tate. You can visit my website at evantatemusic.com. There you'll be able to see even more articles that I've written, or also check out some of my books there, some of my compositions. And I hope to see you again in the next video.